A question to kick us off for the Wednesday, May 29th edition of the Just Basketball Show. Wes Goldberg, Michael Scotto does a great job over at Hoops Hype, getting all the rumors and reports together. Did a mock draft apparently on Tuesday, reporting that the Jazz, with the 10th overall pick, could have a motive from ownership to upgrade, not take a player and keep this rebuild going, but potentially cash in some chips, get another star next to Lauri Markkanen. So we don't know exactly who all will be available, of course, yet, Wes, but of the guys we've heard, of the names we know, of the names that could possibly be available, who do you like next to Markkanen and that Utah core as a second star player?
Am I allowed to say Donovan Mitchell? Because he's kind of exactly what they need.
You took my joke. This is where I was going to go. It's absolutely like Donovan makes all the sense in the world. They got their forward star. They got rid of Gobert. They were more versatile now. Bring Donovan back.
It would be chestnut checkers, wouldn't it, by Danny Ainge, even though this was definitely not the plan. But, oh, my God, Danny Ainge would love to do this and then leak it to various media reporters that he had this plan all along.
Oh, yeah.
It is sort of what they need, though. And it would be, you mentioned kind of like the Jazz are better maybe suited now to Donovan Mitchell's strengths than they were when they even had Donovan Mitchell. It would be a little bit of LeBron leaving Cleveland and going back to Cleveland with Kyrie Irving and winning a championship there. Except that Donovan Mitchell's obviously not LeBron James. But
other than that,
I do think that there's other players that do make sense. Like Trae Young, to me, does make a little bit of sense for Utah. If they wanted to go for like the superstar, which if this is what Ainge is looking for, which tends to be what he looks for, those are kind of the stars that could be out there. And, Utah is very similar to Oklahoma City and San Antonio, where you mentioned that we don't really know who's going to be available yet, just, for sure. But the stars that could be available for teams like Utah, Oklahoma City, and San Antonio, the teams that own like 98% of all the picks over the next 1,000 years of the NBA draft, they have more players available to them because they can include so much draft equity that the rest of the league simply can't. So if Brooklyn does decide that they want to trade Mikal Bridges, if another team decides that they are willing to come off of a superstar, a team like Utah can get in the mix in a way of the way that a lot of other teams can't. And the one thing we do know about Danny Ainge, if there's a star that he wants, he'll at least make the call.
For sure. I like the Trae Young look. I hadn't necessarily thought of that, but it makes perfect sense. Damian Lillard, Drew Holiday, the Jazz were reportedly in on both. Now, of course, like you mentioned, that's Danny Ainge's favorite thing, is to be in on anybody, everybody. How about Karl Anthony Towns? I'm looking at a draft night deal that could just utilize the salaries of John Collins and Jordan Clarkson. That gets you almost all the way to Cat's money. Even if it's after draft night and it's next league year, Clarkson's salary goes down a bit, you can still pretty much make it work. Throw another guy in there maybe. And maybe a pick. Probably a pick. I don't know. I think, I think that Towns as a big man option in a front court that also includes Kessler and Markkanen, you can go super big. It's kind of what he has in Minnesota right now with Naz Reid and with Rudy Gobert. So that one jumped out at me. Let's get to, though, Game 4 of Cats, Timberwolves, and the Dallas Mavericks. Minnesota finally steals a game, prolongs this series for at least one more day. We'll get into that, plus the Pacers offseason and a first drop-in from our draft analyst guest, Zach Cohen of Real GM, all coming up right now. Welcome into the Just Basketball Show. It is Wednesday, May 29th. I am Brendan Clean. That over there is Wes Goldberg. We're back at you for the second time this week. Hit follow or subscribe wherever you are finding us. We're free and available everywhere, including YouTube. We're also all over the place on social media, X, Instagram, TikTok, daily content over there as well. Bonus stuff, even that you don't get on the show. We'll have Zach Cohen later on in the episode to break down what Atlanta should, could, might, will do with the number one overall pick here in June, less than a month away from the NBA draft. We'll get to the Pacers offseason next, but first we had a very interesting Game 4, Wes, where the Wolves were able to tie it up. So we'll get to that to start off the show. Support for today's episode of the Just Basketball Show, though, comes from BetMGM. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use the bonus code JustBasketball and get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Step 1, download the BetMGM Sportsbook app on iOS or Android and sign up using code JustBasketball. Step 2, deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. Step 3, you will receive up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if the bet loses. Just make sure to use that bonus code JustBasketball when you sign up. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 21 or older to wager. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so final score 105-100 West. Why did Minnesota win this one? What went right for them that hadn't been in the first 3 games? This went down to the wire just like they all have, but Minnesota was able to pull away. Why do you think that happened?
A lot of different things happened in this game that were interesting, but at the end of the day, Minnesota's top 2 players outplayed Dallas's top 2 players. And what the difference had been in the previous 3 games was that Dallas's top 2 players outplayed Minnesota's top 2 players. And you got a great game from Karl-Anthony Towns. Great seems strong. A good game for Karl-Anthony Towns. 20 points in the second half for him. He ends up with 25 points. Does foul out in the fourth quarter. A little bit of a ticky-tack call there at the end, but he did have enough dumb ones in the game to warrant being thrown out of this game anyway. So he gets thrown out, but then it was Anthony Edwards late, stepping up in a way that he had not stepped up. Remember the crucial turnover he had at the end of game 2. Some of the other things that he, getting too tired at the end of game 1, not being able to attack the basket or create his own shot. Game 4, completely different story for Ant. He has the biggest shot of the game, end of the clock, gets a screen from Rudy Gobert late, drills like a 19-footer with basically 1 foot within the three-point arc. But whatever, it was what he was feeling. Drain the clock, hits the shot. They go up 5 with 39 seconds left. And on the opposite end, the very next play, Kyrie Irving is the one with the costly turnover. He gets doubled by Rudy Gobert, which didn't look like something that he expected to happen. He panics a little bit, throws an errant pass, turnover, very similar to the thing that Anthony Edwards did a couple of games ago. And at that point, it would require a miracle for Dallas to win this game. And they almost got it. Luka Doncic with a near 4-point play, but misses the free throw after making an impossible shot over Anthony Edwards and getting fouled. Luka misses that free throw. Naz Reid cutting layup to go back up 5 with 11 seconds left. And that's all she wrote in this one. So the Timberwolves' top 2 players stepped up finally.
Yeah, I would even include on the Ant side that little bank shot in that in-between, kind of right outside the restricted area. And also, it's funny, I mean, even to say, obviously, big picture, 13 of 39, Kyrie and Luka versus 20 of 38 for Towns and Edwards. But Kyrie's lefty floater off of like 3 different offensive rebounds felt like it could have been one of those plays if this had gone Dallas's way, but, too many mistakes down the stretch. I'll even go one further. It almost feels like you could even just put it that Minnesota's threes went in the fourth quarter and Dallas's did not. Derek Jones Jr. missed a right corner 3 in a big spot. Luka missed 2 different pull-up threes, I believe, each where they were definitely within 2 possessions on each. One of them might even been a 3-point game when he took it, misses both of those. So on the other hand, Towns made 2 or 3 threes in the fourth, and then Ant the big one that you mentioned. So
and I didn't love.
It's been that kind of series.
I didn't love the shot selection from the Mavericks late in that game. Yeah, like Luka missed a couple of pull-up ones, but there was one where he kind of wheeled in and out of the paint and then kind of back up into a 3-point shot early in the clock, and I'm like, dude, you don't want to do that right now. Come on, like, what are we doing here? I didn't love the shot selection that they were getting overall. We found a few Derek Jones Jr. and PJ Washington shots in the corner, not nearly enough in this game. Yeah. And on the flip side, I love Minnesota's shot selection for the most part in this game. And in particular, Karl-Anthony Towns, he goes from in the first half not taking any 3-pointers, probably because he had a little bit of the yips because he had not been good from beyond the arc for so much of this series. And he does the typical cat stuff where he drives into the lane without much of a plan to do anything. Looks like a first-time skier who hasn't learned how to pizza yet, and and he just kind of keeps drawing fouls that way. Second half, something clicks. I don't know if somebody told him something in the locker room or whatever, but he stops doing that because it wasn't working. And he says, you know what? I'm going to take more threes because I'm the best big man shooter ever, or whatever he says. So, but it worked. He hit all those threes in the second half, and that was huge. And I like the shot selection. Anthony Edwards finding him on those driving kicks. And, the broadcast did a great job of pointing out how good Luka is about getting that deep penetration and making those last-minute passes from under the basket.
Yeah.
Anthony Edwards also does that at a level that you don't really expect from a 22-year-old. He's got the obviously the athleticism, but also the strength with both hands, both arms, to whip those passes around a defender under the basket and to whoever his teammate is in the corner. And I thought he did a really good job of that too in the second half.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the shot selection and just the approach from Minnesota in this one, the driving kicks and everything else. Another thing that happened in this fourth quarter is they tried to go at Luka, but it didn't really work, and they kind of won anyway. But like one of those, I believe one of the cat threes from an Ant feed was when Ant tried to isolate Luka, just couldn't get downhill on him. You also had the Gobert, 2 separate post-ups. I believe he missed one shot, and the other one ended up being the questionable foul call on Luka. So you could tell, in addition to the Towns maybe playing more within himself mode tonight, that they were comfortable. And I guess, hey, when you're in a Game 4 situation and you literally have nothing to lose, maybe that's a little easier to find. On the other side, circling back on the threes and the role players over on the Dallas side of things, I think a lot of this series, in either direction, of course, Dallas's late game heroics have been able to withstand it, but PJ Washington has just been not the player he was for the first 2 rounds. He's 2 of 9 tonight. That brings him to 6 of 27 from deep in this series, and that would have been a whole heck of a lot worse if not for Luka, who Dean Oliver pointed out is shooting 32% on threes in the playoffs overall, Wes, but 46% in the fourth quarter. So that's why I harped on those 2 pull-ups he missed and why I harped on the threes overall, and throw PJ Washington in there as well. Like, it is 2024 in the NBA. I guess a lot of this does just come down to that. But, with Towns, Hardy, is this sustainable?
Hardy went 3 for 4 from three-point range. Like, whatever you didn't get from PJ Washington, you kind of got it from Jaden Hardy in this one. I still zoom in on Kyrie Irving. 1 for 6 from three-point range. If you're a little bit better, you win this game. If you're Dallas, right? Like you did, I thought enough. And I do want to give credit to Minnesota's defense, by the way. I think Rudy Gobert has gotten way too much flack in this series. It's kind of crazy, honestly. I think what the problem is with Gobert is when it doesn't work, it loudly doesn't work. It just looks so bad. It just like when he gets blown by, when he goes up too far to the level of the screen, or if he's kind of screws up drop coverage read or whatever it is, it looks like a scarecrow getting thrown away by a hurricane sometimes. You're just like, what even happened? But they were overall very good, and I liked that they went back to the drop. I lobbied that they should not have ditched the drop in the first place. I don't think that they would be down 3-0 if they had gotten away from the drop as much as that they did. I thought it was working in the first game. It didn't, and that was fine. Dallas just made really tough shots, and then they immediately went away from it in game 2. They went back to it in the second half of this game, which was Minnesota's better half of this game, despite getting out to an early lead in that first quarter. And I thought it really worked. And they held Dallas to about 85 points per 100 possessions in the half court. Yeah, that's the Timberwolves defense. That's what you're looking for. So it usually works. But when it doesn't work, it just looks really bad. And that's just because Rudy Gobert looks a little silly when it doesn't look good. But then late in the game also, they kind of opportunistically used the trap, right? I mentioned the Kyrie Irving turnover. He didn't look like he was expecting Gobert to trap him coming out of that timeout, and he looked frazzled after that. And I was like, okay, so you can have it, you can do both, but you gotta time it right, you gotta call it right, you gotta be opportunistic when you do it. But I thought Minnesota's defense has been mostly good all series. It's just the offense has been lacking because they weren't getting the performances that they needed from Anthony Edwards, and they weren't getting the performances, not even close, that they needed from Towns, and they got those tonight. And then on the other end, the Mavericks got a triple-double from Luka. Luka was awesome for the most part, even though he only shot 33%. But you get, I guess 33% shooting from him, 33% shooting from Kyrie. That's not good enough, right?
And PJ, part of it, yeah.
PJ's part of it too, but like I kind of like I'm like I don't care about role players at this level. Like this is the closeout game, man. Like your stars got to take over, and even with the bad PJ game, if you get average games from your stars, or what you expected from your stars, I should say, then you still win this game if you're the Mavericks.
Exactly, and that's why I was pointing it out. Like tonight, it looks ugly. You can highlight PJ Washington's stat line, but it's kind of been that way, and they won 3 before this. So, yeah. I mean, it really is Towns at the end of the day. I think that has to be it. Edwards, you texted us in our group thread on just saying he looked tired, and I want to point out, like, he played the FIBA World Cup, where he was the number 1 offensive guy for that team, 82 games this season, I believe, and then this is his first long playoff run, so it kind of makes sense that he would not be the guy that was, killing the Suns or, helping get to that 2-0 lead against Denver. So it's going to need to continue to be Towns, and I guess that's where we can wrap it up.
Well, can I one more point on Ant being tired?
Yeah, sure.
It's such a good point that you make there. It's been a long several months of basketball for this guy. It felt like in game 1, Chris Finch was basically like, you're 22, you can handle it. Go guard, go chase around Kyrie Irving and be our lead scorer. And they've sort of gotten away from that more as the series has gone on, kind of giving him more of a break defensively, timeouts and stuff and ways to get him breaks and things like that. I'll say this, though. I go back. I was thinking about this. It popped up on my Twitter feed or something the other day, but and I'd seen the interview before, but Anthony Edwards talking about his pre-draft process and working out in front of the Warriors, and Steve Kerr making him do these drills, going up and down the court, and him and Kerr just being like, "Go do it faster." And Ant's like, "I'm doing it as fast as I can." And Edwards at the end of in the interview was saying, like, by the end of the drill, he was getting tired and he definitely wasn't giving it 100%. And so, Steve Kerr pulls him aside. He's like, "Is that the best you got, really? Like, if we're gonna draft you at number 2, and obviously they never got the chance, but that was the point of the thing. If we're gonna draft you at number 2, you got to be better than that for us." And Anthony Edwards said that after that conversation with Steve Kerr, and they all go out to dinner and stuff after that interview, he called up after the workout, he called up his trainer and says, "We got to change everything we're doing. We got to be better." And it's a really cool story in the fact that Anthony Edwards didn't get defensive. In fact, he internalized it and said, "We can use this afternoon of a tough workout and get better because of it," and overhauled his whole routine and got better conditioning. I bring all this up to say he might still have work to do there. Because if that had been an issue before the draft, maybe it's still an issue now. Because sometimes you are just like, hey, I'm 22, I can handle it. Until you get to the Western Conference Finals, and it's something your body has never gone through before, after playing in the FIBA World Cup, to your point. And all these things. So there might still be a little bit more of that conditioning work to do for Ant.
I don't think it's... It's hard to remember now, but he was not a surefire number 1 overall pick. And Minnesota, there were some side eyes. That was a weird draft, obviously happening during COVID and everything else, but I think the approach, the mentality, the commitment. I mean, remember when him liking football more than basketball was this negative talking point people would throw around? It was a question at one point. All right, so in closing, where do we think this goes with Towns? I mean, it's almost impossible to know with him game to game, but I don't think it's realistic to think he is going to be as bad as he was in game 3 or really as bad as he was in those first 3. And considering these games were already close, Wes, I tend to feel like if they can get anything close to this, just an efficient Cat, if not a hugely productive version of him, we could be in for a couple more competitive games here. I mean, they go back home in game 5, and then, we'll see from there. But getting Towns right makes me feel a lot better about Minnesota to keep this series going.
Yeah, I like the way you phrased that, too, because I don't think you and I are expecting Minnesota to fully come back after being down 0-3 in this series and win this thing. But I think Cat should be better. There's still room to be better, right? Like, maybe he's not shooting as efficiently from three-point range, but there are games, it seems like to be 1 or 2 a series where he's not doing the stupid fouls, like so much of them in this game. I mean, we had an early one where he just fouls, what was it, Luka Doncic at half court late in the shot clock, and you're just like, what are you doing, dude? Like, why are you lunging towards Luka 30 feet away from the basket? And if you cut some of those things out and the errant drives and all these things that kind of get him into foul trouble and end up with him fouling out at the end of this game, even when he was playing really well, at least offensively, then there's still room for a better Cat game in this series. So, yes, to your point, we probably get a better Cat going forward, just maybe because he's due. It might just be that simple because he was so bad in the first 3 games. But, I still expect the Mavericks to close this thing out. I don't know how many more bad Kyrie games there are left in this series. You could basically say the same exact thing. It's like you get a decent game from Luka and Kyrie in the next game, and maybe they close this one out in Minnesota.
Dallas has been awesome on the road all postseason. They've been awesome on the road since Luka first made the playoffs. So I don't think, it's in Minnesota, that's a win. I don't think we should necessarily look at it that way. But it's been an entertaining series. I don't mind another game. We'll probably still be seeing Dallas in the finals. All right, on to the Indiana Pacers, who were eliminated, Wes, in 4 games. They did not win that game 4 against Boston, but also very competitive, very entertaining series. And I think a team that has to feel good, even if we can all agree there was an element of luck in their run. They have Pascal Siakam, who they traded for with full intention, and all indications have been from even the teams bowing out of the sweepstakes to get him at the deadline to the comments from his agent after the acquisition that he will be returning. I think it's just a matter of how much, and if Indiana will give a max. If they will, then I think this might be over. From there, I honestly want to start kind of with the question of what do you feel like, having watched them for this whole playoffs, and honestly, quite a bit of with Halliburton and Siakam because they traded for Pascal so early. What do you think they need? What if you were to just say a type of player or a quality in a player that you would be putting at the top of your whiteboard in that front office if you could have your dream acquisition this summer?
Yeah, so with the Pacers, building around Tyrese Halliburton is pretty interesting, and I've written about this before. But you have to treat Tyrese Halliburton like he's your star quarterback, and what does he like to do, and so what kind of receivers does he like? And he's one of these guys that just wants big targets who run the floor and defend, and that's it. That's all you need. And I wrote that before they went out and acquired Pascal Siakam, and Pascal Siakam fits that to a T. I think if you want to make comparisons, like if Halliburton is Steve Nash, and Siakam might be his Amari Stoudemire. And so when you're kind of building around those two, because you're going to max out Siakam, and all the reporting around it makes it sound like that's going to be a done deal, and we'll see Siakam back with the Pacers.
5 years, $245 million would be the contract. Yep.
Great, do it. He's a perfect fit. And after that, just surround those 2 guys with more players that are long shooting 3-and-D type guys who want to run the floor, want to play in that fast pace. I obviously be opportunistic. It sounds like they're going to be aggressive, just like they were aggressive for Siakam, but they're not going to be stupid either, right? They're not going to make a trade just to make a trade. I like a lot of these guys. Like Nembhard looks like he might be that 3rd star next to these guys. Like he looks great.
And Turner, which frankly already kind of is. So I honestly hate when he gets left out of this. I thought he was awesome all playoffs, and he is another perfect fit here. So they might have 3 building blocks with a couple of young guys who could quickly step into that. Like this team's close, I feel like.
Neesmith looks good, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, what a home run on that guy, and so they've got really interesting pieces. I just think that, and TJ McConnell, it sounds like he's going to come back. He's extension eligible. Do it. The guy's awesome. He's right there pushing the pace, all the leadership stuff. I like all of it.
That's one thing I want to jump in on, though, is based on how Nembhard played and the fact that you have Halliburton, does it make sense to keep all 3? Or could you maybe capitalize on what McConnell... I think the veteran aspect of it is important, so I'm glad you said that. But you could also make a case of like, well, TJ McConnell's been in the league quite a long time. At the end of the day, he probably will never be better than he was in this postseason. We have 2 guys at his position. How many minutes can he realistically get? Especially if my answer to the question of what they need is to get a little bigger. Maybe I think they could get quite a bit for him in a trade, and I wouldn't hold back from exploring that just because he was so awesome so many times for them in the playoffs.
First of all, I think all of Indianapolis would riot if you traded TJ McConnell. So you might not even be allowed to from an ownership perspective. But to your point, you could get something for him. But is it more valuable? Like, what if you got a first round pick back for TJ McConnell? Like, what do you care?
Well, I think my goal would probably be
including him in a bigger deal.
Yeah, maybe it's him and Mathurin, who I think we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah.
And that just can accumulate more and more salary to get you closer to somebody that is already a vet making a difference that you can plug in like you did with Siakam if you're able to do that.
Nobody's saying TJ McConnell's untouchable, but I wouldn't be actively shopping him either. If there was a star that came available that made sense, then and it takes McConnell's salary to get there, then that's something that you got to do. But to me, Mathurin is the guy. Like there's room for all three of these guys with McConnell, Nembhard, and Halliburton, but I don't know that there is a place for Mathurin. To me, like Nembhard could play off the ball, he could play on the ball. McConnell is just such a selfless player who just is so savvy that he knows how to play in between all these guys, even when he's on the court with them. Mathurin just needs the ball. And the thing with him is he does want to run the floor, and he is a little bit more of a battering ram mentality that the rest of this roster doesn't really have. So I'm not just shopping Mathurin for anything, but I do wonder what his overall fit in the grand scheme of things is, and if you can sort of, pivot on that resource and sort of reallocate it some other way that does make sense, make him the centerpiece of some sort of other big deal that gets you something back. But again, I don't know that I'm making any major moves with this team, despite the fact that they're hungry to make moves. I think they're really good, and I think just internal development and a healthy Tyrese Halliburton and all this stuff could mean a lot. And by the way, don't give up on your resources that you have just to make a move this summer when maybe the next Siakam deal will be available at the deadline as opposed to in the offseason. Like there's room for patience here.
For sure. And I think it's a great sign that they were able to get Siakam and get his commitment so quickly. It just bodes well for the idea of, okay, yes, it's Indianapolis, but maybe Halliburton and the way we play is enough to get guys to actually want to be here. Not free agents, but they're not going to have cap space. So if we trade for somebody, they'll maybe want to stick around, and that allows you to be more flexible. But yeah, I guess to me, I'm of the same opinion. Don't jump into anything. Ben Shepherd had an inconsistent three-point shot in the regular season. Carlisle sticks with him. He starts the last two games of this past series when Halliburton had to miss it, and shot 38% from deep over the course of the postseason. That's huge. Jarris Walker is like one of the most freakish, versatile guys in the whole NBA. I love that they gave him time down the stretch of the regular season. I get that he wasn't ready maybe to just, play in the playoffs as a raw athletic guy. He's probably just going to foul like crazy and be lost on offense. So I get that, but he could really blossom as he continues to grow. So it's not a team they traded everything for Siakam and they got to just keep going. They can have some optimism that there's room for internal development here. Before we get to Mathurin, though, because I have some trade ideas there, they also have 3 second-round picks this year and the McConnell contract and everything else, so there's options.
They have like 8 second-round picks or something that they have available to trade between this year and that.
And one of them's 36 this year, so it's a decent pick, yeah.
That is a decent pick. If you're right, they do need size. They need defense. I mean, this team was 26 in defensive rating in the regular season. They weren't much better in the playoffs, even though everybody tried to make us think that they were when they were in the Eastern Conference Finals just to generate some interest in a series that ultimately ended up in a sweep. But whatever. They need to get way better defensively. Part of that is size. I think they need to get better rim protection. Miles Turner is a little bit of an empty calorie rim protector where there's a lot of blocks, but not as much as the team defense rim protection stuff. There's room to grow there. Even if it's not necessarily trading Miles Turner, I just think that there's room to grow in the front court. But
here's where I come in with the size side of thing, and if I'm like encapsulating my goal for them in one sentence, and part of why I threw out the Nembhard McConnell thing and why I would be pretty aggressive on trying to move Mathurin is, ideally for me, if I can get big enough and add a good enough player this offseason or at next deadline, that's a fair point, to make Neesmith my starting 2 instead of my starting 3, now I feel really good. That kind of encapsulates it to me. And like maybe that's Jarris Walker. I'm not really sure he's a 3 to be honest. Ben Shepherd's probably not big enough. So there's a lot of they don't have that wing, and Aaron Neesmith is 6'5". So
it's a good point.
As we saw with him trying to guard Brown or Tatum or some of these guys, even LeBron back in the NBA Cup game, he can't really do that. So I think in a perfect world, he's a 2. You get like a 6'8" guy to be your 3. Siakam's your 4. They also need rebounding because Siakam's not a great rebounder. So get somebody bigger to fill that, and I think you feel a lot better about all this.
Would you consider, I know I just said I wouldn't trade T.J. McConnell, but would you trade T.J. McConnell to Brooklyn, who needs a point guard, for Dorian Finney-Smith? Like, is that something that that moves the needle? Because he gives you that wing defender, right?
In a heartbeat.
Consider it.
Yeah.
You would do it in a heartbeat. I would do it in a heartbeat.
I would do it in a heartbeat. I mean, like, here's the thing about McConnell. He wasn't really doing this until this season at all. And even more specifically, he wasn't really doing it until the second half of the season. Like, when he played in that in-season tournament, the Vegas games, it was a surprise. He hadn't really been in the rotation. And now we feel like he's so valuable, so, core to what they are, but he wasn't. They didn't even think of him that way like 8 months ago. So if you could turn that into somebody who fits more of a position of need, especially given that Nembhard's even better now and actually I believe can continue to get better, whereas again, McConnell's like, in his 30s. That's kind of where I am. I also have one more question on the Siakam side of it. He's already 30. Is it a no-brainer to give him 5 years?
Yep.
Really? You think, is it game will age fine, or you just have to do it because you're the Pacers and you traded for him?
Both. I mean, I think Siakam's going to age fine. He does not look like he's losing a step even a little bit, in terms of his athleticism. He's an awesome player. He's, a year removed from being All-NBA?
Never really had major injury, even though he's on the Nick Nurse minutes load. He's never really gotten hurt.
And wants to be there. You're the Pacers. Yeah. You don't get that luxury, man. Like, you have a 30-year-old that wants to be there who's All-NBA caliber and fits perfect with your superstar. Give him all the money and then more if you need to.
So a new contract for him starting at, I think it's like $42.5 million in year 1 on that max deal, puts them in the tax. And they're really not able to get out of it unless they were to just pretty much offload Mathurin and Jalen Smith and not retain Obi Toppin, a.k.a. getting worse, which they're not going to intentionally do. So that's the other consideration. That doesn't really matter as far as 4 years versus 5. If you're starting him at 42.5, you're in the tax. So just another thing to drop in there. Last free agency thing before we get into Mathurin trades. Obi Toppin. Keep him, don't keep him. He's big, but to me, he's kind of fake size. He doesn't really do big man things. So I know I'm saying stay big, get bigger, but I'm kind of okay getting rid of Toppin because I don't actually think he provides that stuff despite being 6'8", 6'9".
You're right. Yeah, I mean, chicken legs, dude. Like the guys,
high center of gravity.
All chest, no legs at the gym, man. Like that's whatever, dude. Like if it gets you in the dunk contest, I like Obi Toppin fine. I don't mean to rag on him, but there's not a whole lot of strength there. There's not a whole lot of oomph in his game other than playing above the rim. Yeah, that's okay. Let him walk. And if Jalen Smith, he might walk away from that player option. He might be looking for more of an opportunity. There's not going to be a ton there for him. Like there might even be an option where he takes less on a mid-level exception, like the taxpayer MLE at $5 million, which would be $2 million less than he's making, but gets an opportunity to play somewhere and bets on himself. We see this all the time. That wouldn't be shocking. Yeah. So I think Jalen Smith can easily opt out and look for playing time somewhere else because he's not going to really get it in Indiana. And so if Toppin walks, if Jalen Smith walks, and if you do make some sort of trade that sends McConnell elsewhere or Mathurin elsewhere, and maybe you take back a little bit less money in those deals, then you could get back under the tax if you're motivated, if you're the Pacers, and whatever. I don't know how motivated they are. I'm not their owner, but that's just sort of a them problem. But
it sounds cheap to say that could be a goal, but I think it would just be in anticipation of you're going to be in it soon.
And avoiding and just sort of delaying the clock on the repeater. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't trade for Siakam and then say we can't pay the tax. You don't acquire Halliburton and go all in around him. I think testament to the Pacers.
You could let Obi Toppin and Jalen Smith walk and be okay with it at the same time.
Exactly. And then say, okay, next year maybe we'll get another guy here that's a vet and we're going to pay this soon, but maybe let's not rush it. And I would get that. All right, before we get to Ben Mathurin trades and then to Zach Cohen to talk the number one pick in the NBA draft, I have a story for you that I've been dying to tell throughout this whole Pacers playoff run, and now they're out, and we're not going to talk about them for a while, so I have to tell it here. And it's the single most embarrassing reporting moment I've had covering the NBA, I think.
Okay.
Well, it's this one, or there was one time when we were doing Zoom interviews during the NBA Finals in 2021, still back in that age, where I asked Jay Crowder a question about stopping Giannis, and he thought I was asking him it in like a please talk up Giannis kind of way, and got like very, very animated with me over a Zoom, but that was less because it wasn't face-to-face.
I have a Zoom, embarrassing Zoom story I'll save for another show, but we could do embarrassing reporting stories as off-season topic.
Honestly, but this one's Neesmith related, so let's keep it in. So
yeah.
I covered the NBA draft pretty closely when the Suns sucked, and like went to the Combine once and all this sort of stuff, and would go to college games because the Pac-12 used to exist here, and good teams would come through and everything else. This was not a Pac-12 game. It was at a Jerry Colangelo honorary tournament thing that they would do in the Suns Arena downtown, where they would invite like the top college programs. So I got to see Robert Williams play DeAndre Ayton. I got to see Brandon Clark and Rui Hachimura at Gonzaga versus Grant Williams at Tennessee. Yeah. Yes, all this stuff. So this year was Vanderbilt, and that was when Jerry Stackhouse was coaching the program, and Aaron Neesmith came. So I wanted to do a little feature on Neesmith. I broke down some of his film, and I would take that opportunity of like, great, there's no coverage, there's no beat writers for a lot of these college teams. I can get like a good quote or two from a prospect about their game, their development, their this, their that, and that makes for a decent story because not a lot of people are covering it from a draft angle and everything else. Stackhouse is a pro-style coach, and Neesmith is kind of this prototypical wing, getting more on-ball opportunities as a sophomore. Great, all good stuff. I get Neesmith one-on-one outside the locker room post-game. They lost the game to, I believe it was Santa Clara, but I didn't really care. I'm trying to talk to him about his, like, your playmaking and what's Coach Stackhouse bringing out of you with the pro mentality coming from the G League and the Raptors and everything else, and let's just walk through your game. But I did not pay enough attention to the result of the game. I was a little too hyped up to ask him all those questions about his development, Wes, and I straddle up to him, and he's still in uniform, sweating, whatever, coming off the emotions of the game, and I congratulated Aaron Neesmith on winning the game, which he did not do. And I have never gotten a more blank stare and felt like I wanted to just run away and jump into some kind of hole or off of some kind of bridge, or I don't really know, than I did in that moment. And I've never forgotten that, clearly. I was like, you are a complete moron. Why did you just... I mean, it was like a random game. He didn't really care, but it was just like, get the basic details of what just happened correct if you're going to come talk to me.
Did you just show up here? Right.
Yeah.
That's awful. Great. You should definitely bring that up. There is a non-0% chance that he remembers that as one of his weirdest reporter interactions.
I hope not. But like, what's funny is he didn't address it. He didn't say like, we lost. He just kind of...
Right. Oh, he just was polite.
He just sort of was like, yeah, or just maybe
confused.
Didn't even respond at all, and I just kind of went into my question. But man, brutal. Glad he recovered from that experience and was able to make a difference.
It took him a while
in the NBA playoffs. It did.
It took him it did change the scenery. He had to leave Boston, go to Indiana.
Maybe I scarred him so bad. It took him this post-hype breakout was all my fault. All right, so Aaron Neesmith aside, I think he'll be a starter next year. I don't think Ben Mathurin will be. So here's what I had. Wizards, Spurs, Bulls. Those were the only teams that really jumped to mind as like a clear-cut fit, but I think Mathurin makes sense for me for a lot of teams who might be in some kind of rebuilding situation as just a buy low option. So it wasn't super easy to say this team will absolutely be dying to get him, but if he's available and that becomes known, I think a lot of teams could feel like they could be the team to develop him. League average efficiency, but awful defender, doesn't really play make, needs to be developed. But what did you think? Where could he land? Where could the Pacers look to maybe use him to upgrade?
No, I think those are the right teams, and I think we've already landed on the right positions. If you can turn his potential as a scoring guard, probably a sixth man at the end of the day, and I think he's got there are times, man, when he's on the court and you're like, he might be the most athletic player out here.
Yeah.
It's crazy what he can do in terms of, when he's in his bag and he's finishing. I am not even close to giving up on Benedict Mathurin, and it was a little bit of a down season for him, but he also got hurt at the end. And so, the guy.
Your point about him being
points.
such a downhill, physical, aggressive guy, that's his best quality, and that's the thing that's impossible to replicate. So you add a little spruce to the rest of it, and you're working with something.
There are teams that look for that, right? Like the Clippers are a team that is always sort of looking for that. And if Russell Westbrook leaves, maybe they go after a guy like Mathurin and just punch up their pace a little bit more. It's something that a lot of teams, if they decide that they want to play fast, which every team at Media Day says they want to play faster, having a guy that plays fast all the time like Mathurin could be helpful in accomplishing that. So, and then, so if you can repurpose that for somebody who adds some size, adds some a little bit more positional versatility, I think that's probably what you're looking for if you're the Pacers.
The problem for me was I struggled to find a deal that achieves what I said was my goal for the Pacers and involves Mathurin. So maybe it's going to be, just like the way they built this roster, it might be more doing a lot of things, keeping a lot of balls in the air. The one I found, Wes, that I could kind of get behind, even though it's not fully fitting what we've discussed, is sort of just turning Ben Mathurin into a better Ben Mathurin. So I had TJ McConnell and him to the Spurs for Keldon Johnson as an option. It's just sort of, hey, we're ready to win. Let's get a bench scorer who we already know is efficient and can contribute and get rid of the young guy.
Doesn't play defense.
Exactly. Very similar players,
right
honestly.
Yeah. Look, I don't hate that. I also think that there's another version of this where you say, maybe we do want to keep Obi Toppin. Maybe we do want to keep Jalen Smith. Maybe we do want to give TJ McConnell a raise on an extension. The thing with Benedict Mathurin is he's still on his rookie contract. It's just hard to find, and this is, I'm sure, what you ran into, 1-for-1 matches for him for guys who are also on rookie contracts, basically. And if they're not on rookie contracts, they're kind of just like older, washed-up veterans who are making the same amount of money. You're not really finding a guy in his prime unless you're packaging a bunch of players together, which, again, you could. But you could just go, okay, let's trade Mathurin to this team into cap space, get a couple of draft picks back because we don't have a lot of them, and maybe that helps us make that trade either later this offseason or closer to the deadline or maybe next summer. Just get some assets back, kind of take this resource who's on a rookie scale contract, kick the can down the road, kind of reset the clock on this one asset. Maybe that's just something that you do. And then in the short term, maybe it helps you retain one of Toppin or Smith or somebody like that.
Yeah, I think the Thunder and Magic are two teams with space that could use him just as an upside bet. They're already winning. They're kind of already on their way, but maybe he's like their eighth man next year, and both of those teams could use a little more juice as far as creators go. But yeah, I think, it's a testament to how versatile they've already been. I think that they have so many options. They have a lot of things that could help them, but they already just made the conference finals, and all their best players outside of Siakam are young and Turner, I guess. So it's
and Mathurin looked like a core
see what happens.
a year ago. He was getting, I think he got 6th man of the year votes as a rookie, right? And so this guy looked like every bit of the core piece, and he kind of got lapped by some of these other dudes, and that's a good thing. That's a good problem to have if you're the Pacers. I have one other trade for you that's not Mathurin related.
Yeah, give it to me.
Before we get off the Pacers. Who says no to a Miles Turner for Jarrett Allen swap?
I think the Pacers, I do think they want to play 5 out. So, or as close to it as they can. Siakam doesn't fully live in that, but when he has the ball, everybody else he's the one in, So I don't know. I think they'll be hard pressed to get rid of Turner, and I think he'll look better as a defender if they're able to keep the ball in front of them and execute better and be bigger.
My thought process was that Allen gives them another big target who runs the floor. Turner got better as a floor runner as this season went on. I was actually really impressed with how he did that in the playoffs. I thought he was just rolling to the rim really hard, but Jared Allen's just more consistently doing that and is a bigger target kind of on the move than Turner is, who kind of likes to settle into a sweet spot and get the ball with his back towards the basket and kind of start making his moves, and or more of like a pick and pop kind of guy in the half court. And then Jared Allen's just a flatly better rim protector than Miles Turner is, and I think he would actually improve the defense. Miles Turner would give Cleveland something that they've been looking for in terms of some offensive punch, a guy who could space the floor. You've got Evan Mobley back there to kind of anchor the defense behind Turner, gives them a little
much
bit more
better
of a
fit with
versatile
Mobley.
look. Much better fit with Mobley. So I don't know. I thought it would be interesting. Turner's also one more year left on his contract, so it would be now would be the time to trade him if you weren't fully sold on him if you're the Pacers. But then again, I do agree with you. He's got great chemistry with Halliburton. Maybe they are sold on Turner.
Him and Obi Toppin are the exact opposite. Obi Toppin has a really high center of gravity. Turner is a really low center of gravity. If you just maybe morph them into one player, it'd be like an all-NBA guy, it feels like. But yeah, I mean, again, they have a ton of options. It's a very cool team, a very impressive team-building accomplishment here. And even, again, as Chris and I talked about, as we've said here, even if it's not, they were a conference finals team in the most historical, real sense of that achievement. They're on their way, and they easily could be back next year, and then that might even be more for real. So, all right, let's get to Zach Cohen. We broke down all the different prospects in the mix at number 1 this year, how Atlanta could look at it, what they need, and some wild cards based on history from other bad drafts. First, want to tell you guys about our friends at Homage, an ultra-comfortable specialty apparel company with NBA and WNBA licenses that use its vintage-inspired designs to pay homage to the greatest stories, traditions, and figures across sports, music, and pop culture. Use the link below, make your purchase, support the Just Basketball Show. Father's Day coming up. WNBA season in full swing. Maybe you've come to love some NBA character when your team got eliminated and you just want to support that guy. They have NBA Jam t-shirts. They have logo t-shirts. Tons of good stuff. The link is in the show description. Click that. Buy what you would normally buy, and we get some of that money. All right, next up, Zach Cohen of Real GM talking the number 1 pick. Joined now by Zachary Cohen. Writes about the NBA draft at Real GM. Does betting content all over the place in addition to that. And he is going to be joining us periodically up until draft season. Break everything down, but we're going to start with the number 1 overall pick here because, of course, that's, I think, what's on everybody's mind, Zach. And I'll make it easy. Who do you think should be the number 1 overall pick this year?
You know, it's a really weird question because I do think that this year more than others, you know, you kind of have to go based on fit. I think that there's a little bit more, you know, uncertainty at the top of the draft where you can't just draft the best player available because, you know, you're talking about the Hawks who have multiple guards on their team. And if it were me picking, you know, with a blank slate, I'd probably go Nikola Topic, to be honest. That's kind of my number 1 in this draft. I think that his on-ball creation is just incredible. And I think that what we've seen from him, you know, overseas, no matter where he's played, has been tremendous. But at the same time, yeah, you're talking about Atlanta. They can't take another on-ball player. You know, they might look to trade DeJounte Murray or Trae Young this year. So I do think that, you know, Alex Sarr is the name that we see everywhere. I think that makes a lot of sense. Just, you know, a big forward that can really defend, has a lot of skills, both ends of the floor, honestly. But I also think that there's a slight chance, we're seeing it in reporting now, that Donovan Clingan does go number 1. And I'll be honest, like, if you're asking me for a player in this draft that, like, I'm sure is going to be a really good NBA player, you're probably talking about Clingan, even though he's not number 1 on my board.
I think that's a great kind of encapsulation of how crazy this is all going to be. And the Atlanta side of it's interesting. I mean, I think people have probably pointed it out. I mean, the French connection literally there with Gobert and Snyder, and now maybe Sarr and Snyder. There is a little bit of a track record there in addition to the team need. But I went back and looked a little bit, right? Because this draft is getting compared to 2000, 2013, just these years where there was no obvious number 1 and a lack of talent overall. And obviously 2000, it's Kenyon Martin. 2013, it's Anthony Bennett. Could you give me who you think this year's Kenyon Martin and this year's Anthony Bennett would be? Because those are very different guys, right? One's a 4-year player back in that era. One is a raw, toolsy, kind of exactly what the NBA thought it needed in 2013, which is like a stretch 4 who could play defense. You don't have to give me one, but in those molds, if we're kind of looking at the different ways this could go, Zach, who jumps to mind as an example of the experienced guy, an example of the raw guy that teams could fall in love with through this process and that the Hawks might take?
I mean, I guess if you're looking for a player that's kind of off the board, not off the board, just would be a little surprising at number one, but kind of has, the tools of a number one pick, I guess I'll go with Cody Williams, just because I do think that that's a guy that's, 6'8", really long, really good on the defensive end, but also offensively just has everything you're really looking for in a wing. Just has the ability to shoot, obviously a small sample size, but shot the three-point ball really well last year. Really does remind me of his brother. It's like a really easy comparison to make, but Jalen Williams is a really good NBA player. There are a lot of similarities in his game, and if you kind of look at the way they develop, like there's a way you could look at yourself and talk yourself into Cody being a top 3 pick in this draft. And I do think that that would be the one that I think would be the most surprising, but it wouldn't shock me at all if the Hawks were just like, we think this guy has the most potential in this draft. We're going with Cody Williams.
Is there a pool of guys? You mentioned sort of like an off-the-board thing maybe with Cody Williams, but would you say that there's a pool of guys who are seriously being considered for like the first 2 or 3 picks here? Is it sort of the same pool of guys that are being talked about there?
It seems like it. I mean, Jonathan Givony has kind of came out and said who the guys that Atlanta is considering, and it does seem like it's Sarr, it's Zachary Reese-Shea, it's Donovan Clingan. I don't think that Nikola Topic was in there, but I remember there was a pool of 5 names that he was considering. But I do think that at most of the drafts you're going to see moving up until the actual draft, you're going to see Sarr, you're going to see Reese-Shea as the top pick of this draft.
Why is Clingan considered just like a automatic top 10 lottery guy, and Zach Edey isn't? Because I look at both of those guys and I see giant humans with great touch in the paint and by the basket, rebounders, shot blocking, rim protection. I'm reading these scouting reports, and I got to be honest, Zach, I don't know that it's that big of a difference when I'm reading this stuff. And I watched, the March Madness, and I'm like, why is Clingan? I know he's better. He's that much better than Edey. Edey's the polarizing prospect, and everybody's got Clingan in the top 5.
I think with Clingan, he played in the UConn offense. It's a lot of read and react. Really good passer, just being able to read the floor. I think that with Edey, you're talking about a guy that's a little slower in the foot defensively and just was used to being fed the ball all game at the college level, playing against guys that were mostly smaller than him. I actually did write in my Real GM write-up for Edey. He played well against NBA size centers in college, but I just think that Edey was so used to a ball-dominant role on that Purdue team that there's really no way to really just trying to project what he's going to look like as a small part of an NBA offense. I do think that he's going to be a guy that does a really good job giving you 15, 20 minutes off the bench. I just think his size kind of warps the game a little bit. I think that some of his skills are very translatable, but I do think that the slow-footedness on the defensive end is kind of the big differentiator. I think that Clingan is, I don't know, I see all defensive potential with Clingan.
I like him. He was, you kind of mentioned it even before I asked you the Kenyon Martin question, Zach, but to me, he was the closest. I mean, we don't see 4-year guys who break out scoring-wise in year 4 for a mid-major. That track record with Kenyon Martin at Cincinnati, it's not really a one-to-one comp, but that's who I had in mind just because he has the 1 extra year. And then Cody Williams is exactly where I went for the more crazy option, the more outside the box, the more athletic kind of toolsy guy, but the other big archetype or category here is all these international dudes, right? And I guess this sounds dumb in a way because of the era we're in, but I wonder what you think of if we're at a point where an international player can go number 1 and we just don't blink an eye. Obviously that happened last year, but that's a little different. Victor Wembanyama was a no-brainer, but we're watching a dude probably, get to the NBA Finals here in Luka Doncic, who should have gone number 1, did not go number 1, in large part because of some of this bias that we see. So the Hawks traditionally haven't really taken international players in recent years. Maybe Quinn Snyder changes that, like we said, but how much do you think that's still there of just the lack of info, the lack of familiarity, the fact that all these owners are just old dudes who don't pay attention to this stuff and they're going to trust, I watched that guy, like Wes was just saying. Well, we all watched Donovan Clingan. Take him. I know him. Do you think we're still there, or do you think all this success, all these MVP awards lately have turned a corner and we might see Reese-Shea or Topic or one of these dudes just surprise us and go number 1?
I think they're definitely more open-minded now. I think that they got to look to EuroLeague, like especially this year where you're talking about a pretty small, pool of players that are really at an elite level in the college game. So I think they're definitely more open to it. Hopefully this draft, like if it doesn't produce, an all-star at number 1, we don't look at it and say, oh, these international guys stink. Hopefully they just realize that this is just kind of a down year. But I do have, some small concerns with Sarr. I mean, I still understand like the case for him going number 1, but I do think he's a little further along from other potential number 1 picks we've seen in the last couple of years, just in that we're talking about a guy that like we compare him to Jaren Jackson Jr. That's kind of the most, used comp out there I think that I've seen for him. But offensively, Sarr just hasn't shown that much. I think that defensively, just an unbelievable prospect. I think he covers a lot of ground. He can guard, you can switch on the perimeter. He's fine. I think he's good inside, really good at deterring shots at the rim. But, like, his jumper's really far away, in my opinion. Shot like 28% from 3 last year. Free throw shooting got better throughout the course of the season, but I'm just not sure it's really easy to project what his offensive game is going to look like at the next level. So hopefully, yeah, like if he does, take some time, we're not looking next year and saying, oh, international guy busted in 2024.
Yeah, and to your point, it looks like the 5 or 6 of the top 10 or 11 guys are all not necessarily international, but you combine international with the G League Ignite and some of these other things like alternative programs, even Sarr spending time with OT Elite, right? Like you've got all these alternative paths that are feeding now the very top of the draft. And we're not necessarily new here, but this is to me, at least what I can remember, like it's 50% basically alt path and college kids. And to your point, it might not have to be the number 1 guy that fails, but if 4 of the 6 guys who get drafted from these alternative paths, whether it be the G League Ignite or international, people might also be able to use that as a criticism. But to your point, they shouldn't. And if anything, it's a criticism to how bad the college kids are.
Well, actually, to jump in here, because part of why I asked that question too isn't just this. Like this year, it's somewhat of an anomaly, just that there is so much uncertainty, and you could see it just being like pinned on these players, even though it's not their fault when they were born, But like in 2000, right? To keep using these couple of examples, Hito Turkoglu becomes like the number 1 guy. You can go on Basketball Reference and sort drafts by win shares. He's number 1 from that draft. He went 16th. He was, I believe, the first international guy drafted that year. And then in 2013, obviously, that's the Giannis and Gobert draft. And so we've seen in even these awful drafts, international guys tend to be, when we look back, they're the guys that NBA teams underrated, that they weren't willing to take that risk on. I'm not, of course, there's probably not a Giannis in this draft. There might not even be a Gobert, or maybe not even a Turkoglu, but like that seems to kind of be the margin that you can win on if you're willing to take a risk on one of those guys. Now this year, that might be at 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 instead of like 15, 20, 30. But it's interesting to just think that if you can guess right on one of those guys, history tells us that's how you're going to get value in a bad draft. So is there, which you said Topic, tell us about him. What do you like about him? What could he do in the NBA, Zach?
I just think that Topic is a guy that like you could roll the ball out to him and kind of run your entire offense around him. I think that he's that good of just an on-ball engine. He's a really, really good pick and roll player, just like getting downhill, attacking the rim. He's a really good finisher. He doesn't play above the rim, but finishes with both hands, just relentlessly attacks, kind of, gets to the paint whenever he wants to. Can make every pass in the book. I know that there are concerns about his jump shot, but he shoots like 90% from the free throw line. I think that his form looks pretty nice. Like he shoots a little bit of like a line drive, but I'm not really concerned about his jumper. The only thing I am concerned about with him a little bit is that he did get injured overseas playing for his second team this year. Jonathan Givony in his most recent thing did say that like, the NBA teams are worried about the way they treated that injury. Potentially might have needed surgery if he were, in the States. So that's what I'm a little concerned about with him. But like, I think if you're drafting for upside in this draft, that's about as good as you could do. Like, I think that he's a guy that could be a really special offensive player that raises the floor of an NBA team, where offensive efficiency for that team could be like top 15. I think he's that good.
So it sounds like that might be the most like translatable NBA skill in this draft from day one is maybe Topic's pick and roll ability, his ability to just sort of run an offense. Is that fair?
I think so. I mean, like outside of like a Dalton Connect being a good shooter at the next level, like
right.
that, like there are things that translate just so easily. I think Klingen's defense is going to do the same, but I think Topic's ability to create for himself and his teammates is like probably the most translatable upside swing.
What would be also Like, what would be the biggest gamble? Like, if you just wanted to go crazy with the number 1 pick, and you're like, I want to find the next Giannis. I want to find like just the complete home run swing here. I have ultimate job security. If it doesn't work out, nobody's going to care. The owner's not going to call my office. Who would you go with?
I think that would still be Cody Williams. Like, I just think that he has the most tantalizing, combination of size, tools, and skill. I just think that he has the most upside of anybody here. Another one, I guess you could say, is Ron Holland, who had a disappointing season in the G League. Really has a lot to do to figure out his shot, but at the same time, just a really explosive athlete, really good perimeter defender. Potentially an all defensive wing defender, which is obviously something that a lot of teams can use. But at the same time, the jumper is just such a nightmare right now that like there are concerns about whether or not he'll be able to play like in the playoffs when he does get to the NBA. So that's a guy that if you do somehow figure out the shot, if you're really confident in your shooting coaches, like maybe that's the swing you make. But I don't think I can get there with him as a top 5 pick.
Yeah, when we had I had Norris Cole on here talking about Buzelis and Holland a couple months ago. He raved about Holland as just a worker, and he was making the pitch. If you take that guy, he will exceed your expectations. He will overachieve. Of course, take that for what it's worth. That's a teammate, but that's also a teammate who's not going to BS. What did he have to gain by lying about Ron Holland? So I thought that was an interesting data point, and he, him and Williams are, it's just betting on athleticism, and that's kind of why I had them both in that Anthony Bennett mold. But I think Williams, Wes, like you got to get used to this, Zach, if you're back on with us. Cody Williams went to my high school, as did J-Dub. So
here we go.
It's homerism. So, I just want to get my biases out of the way.
What was the mascot of your high school?
Early on here, a puma.
That makes sense. I don't know why.
Fully stolen from Penn State. They're the Panthers, right?
Same colors?
No, but the same exact icon, and then they just stole it.
That's what high schools do.
Yes, exactly.
My middle school was the Oakland Raiders mascot, so
yeah,
this is going well.
Our rival was taken from the Memphis Grizzlies, so that's just how this stuff goes. But on the topic of Williams, he leads me into my last question here, which is, a lot of people talk about it in this way, but I think it's really helpful, which is when we're talking about the draft, looking at, because it's helpful that it happens around the same time, the final few teams in the NBA. What's working? What's winning? And what could we see teams value more because of that? I already teased that Williams feels like that to me. I mean, literally his brother made the Final 8. Jaden McDaniels feels like a very obvious comp there as well. But who else to you jumps out, Zach, as somebody where you're looking at the teams that have made it the furthest, guys that might be value a little more highly in front offices as their wheels are spinning on, hey, if we want to beat that, what do we need?
I mean, I do think that Klingen's there. Like, everybody wants to clown on Rudy Gobert, like what he's done in these playoffs. But, the on-off numbers are really favorable for Gobert. Like, he's still a really valuable player for a winning team. I'm not getting sucked up in the memes of, like, him, like, not putting a hand up on Luka. Like, that's just not who I am. So I think that Klingen's ability to defend in the interior is, like, that's still really valuable. I think that the teams are going to want him. I think, like, Cody Williams, like, you look at the Celtics right now, like, I see him being pretty similar, like if he does pan out, to both Tatum and Jaylen Brown. I don't know, like Risa Shea, like in theory, is a winning basketball player. Like he's a 3-and-D wing that, like just really athletic, just gets up and down the floor in a hurry, really good in transition. I think that like maybe I am just not there with his jumper right now, and I think that he's a little weak. But I think that he can get there. Like the idea of Risa Shea is definitely something that you see in the playoffs right now, competing and helping a team win.
What about a guy like Reed Shepherd? Because I could see a lot of front offices being like, we need our Derek White. We need our Mike Conley. We need that. And they could look at Reed Shepherd as
Nemhard.
Yeah, or Nemhard, exactly.
I love Reed Shepherd, like especially if you have a big like ball handler. Like I think that Reed Shepherd can solve a lot of the problems with the Detroit Pistons. Like I know that's not a team that is one piece away, but like you stick him next to Cade, he guards the ones. Like then he's an off-ball shooter, one of the best shooters in this draft. Gives you a little secondary playmaking. I think if he ends up in the right situation, like he's going to be a stud.
I really like him. I'm starting to like him. I got a game for us before we sign off here. Is that all right?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. It's really easy. I'm going to name players from last year's draft, and you stop me when they don't go number 1 in this draft. Okay?
All right.
Victor Wembanyama, obviously. Brandon Miller, obviously. Scoot Henderson, probably, right?
Yeah, I would. I had a higher evaluation on Scoot for sure.
Amen and Asar Thompson.
Yes, I think that they both would.
Anthony Black.
That's probably where it stops. I think that I wouldn't take Black 1 in this draft.
That's 5 guys. That's a lot. That is a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, even the year before, like
Derek Lively.
Shaden Sharp probably goes number 1 in this draft. So now I'm getting to 7, like Dyson Daniels, I guess, probably is where it ends there. You got Mathurin, Ivy, Murray, Jabari, Chet, Paolo. I think all those guys go number 1. It's kind of rough.
And I was super high on Dyson Daniels, so that's like I might have put a ticket in more in this draft.
Wow. Great. All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I wanted to circle back on, you mentioned like what would be the most out of the box, like trying to find the Giannis in this draft. I think we should just kind of call that the Washington Wizards theorem or something. Like they feel to me like the team that is the most likely to try something like that. I mean, we were just going through last year, and next up would have been Bilal Coulibaly, who I don't even think people would have thought would go 7, but looked pretty decent in Summer League in the limited time he played before he got hurt. So I think that their willingness to take international guys, the fact that they're just in full tank reset, rebuild mode, that really feels like where this changes. I was just going to go back to the Hawks to close us out by just asking Zach, like, you can correct me on anything you disagree with the premise of here, but my kind of working theory is that they'll probably keep Trey and are more likely to trade DeJounte. We've already heard like DeAndre Hunter's available. I would imagine everything but Jalen Johnson is being, released into the market, and they'll see what they can get. Who do you think, just coming back to fit, just locks into place with a team that is kind of Trae Young, Jalen Johnson, and then this guy, whoever it's going to be? What do you like the best to kind of keep winning a little, hopefully, but also give them another young asset going forward?
I kind of hate to go with like a traditional center at number 1 right now, but I think that if you are keeping Trae, you just go cling in and just kind of build off, having a guy behind Trae that can really anchor the defense, really shore things up there. I think he'd be a good pick and roll partner for Trae. I think that, Quinn Snyder coached Gobert. He can get the best out of Klingon. So I think that that's kind of where I've been going with it. When people ask me like who they should bet to go number 1, I always say like, how much say do you think Quinn Snyder has in the organization? Because he might see a Rudy Gobert like clone and just want him.
That's a great call, actually. Yeah. Is that what you would do if you were the Hawks with number 1?
I think so. Like I think that if I'm keeping Trae for sure, and then I would take Klingon.
There you have it.
They've drafted pretty well, but it's such a weird thing with the Hawks, right? Like their whole front office is different now, and they really only have one pick under their belt, which was Buffkin last year, who we didn't see. I mean, Jalen Johnson, Okongwu, Herter, DeAndre Hunter was like, all things considered, he didn't bust out. John Collins late in the first round. Trae, obviously they didn't take Luka, but Trae's been really good. They really, outside of like Cam Reddish, they've hit on most of their picks over time. Even AJ Griffin seemed like a pretty decent guy. He didn't play much this past year.
It's also a dramatic.
But everything's changed now.
Exactly.
Exactly. That was my point, right? Yeah. It's like, so then how much credit do you even give them, and how much say does Quinn have? And ownership seems to always be meddling there. It's a very weird team to have number 1 in a bad draft. It feels like everything is on the table.
Yeah, they seem to have like a front office, a lot of disconnect there.
Yeah, and all their front office is like former players now who don't have exactly a lot of experience under their belt. So I'm not saying they're not capable, but it's definitely unique. All right. Hoping to have Zach back on throughout draft season as we ramp up toward late June, when all this will be figured out once and for all. You can check his writing on the draft out over at RealGM. We'll throw his Twitter up on the screen for the YouTube audience. And that'll do it for today's episode of the Just Basketball Show. Catch us one more time later this week, Friday. We might have an NBA Finals hangover by then. We might already be done talking about it, tired of talking about it with all this extra time, but we'll have some content for you coming. Enjoy the hoops in the meantime, and we will catch you guys all then.